last announcement of the night. I'm officially announcing I'm back.
Over the past 70 years, media mogul Rupert Murdoch built a small Australian family newspaper company into arguably the most powerful conservative media empire in history. An empire with leverage that can punish enemies, reward allies, and put politicians in power in Australia, Britain, and the United States. With a market cap of $13.5 billion, News Corp is one of the most influential companies on the planet. Hi, I'm Ice. In this video, I invite you to join me as I delve into how a media magnate ruled the world. The term fourth state or fourth power has been used in the modern era to refer to the press and news media's capacity of advocacy and its ability to frame political issues. Since 1803, places in the public gallery of the British House of Commons, Britain's Congress equivalent, have been reserved for journalists. And since the 19th century, historians, philosophers, thinkers, and politicians have repeatedly highlighted the significance of the press that qualified it to be the fourth branch of government. Press generally referred to print media. Fast forward to recent years, media has become a broader term that includes TV, radio, internet, etc. And the term press migrated to mean all major media sources. The power that philosophers and thinkers tried to link with media has historically accrued slowly, although some may argue that the power of traditional media has been fading slowly due to the rise of social media that coincided with the decline of trust in traditional media. But this is a topic for another day. As the power of media has increased over the course of generations, it became more concentrated in media conglomerates, some of which was owned by dynastic families. For instance, the Graham family owned the Washington Post for 80 years before selling it to Jeff Bezos. William Hearst III still presides over the Hearst Corporation, whose roots can be traced to his great-grandfather. Its well-known titles include Harper's Bazaar, Esquire, and the San Francisco Chronicle. And the New York Times has been controlled by the Sulzberger family for more than a century. And despite being relatively young by comparison, it would be hard to argue that there has been a more powerful media family on Earth than the Murdoch family. More than any other media company, the Murdoch's empire enabled the right-wing populist wave that turned into the defining political movement that disrupted the world order over the last half-century. In 2019, the New York Times published a long three-part feature into the Murdoch empire, the family, the political influence, and the issue of succession. This feature will be my main source as I follow the journey of the Murdoch family, whose influence can be seen across the English-speaking world, where it helped elevate marginal demagogues, mainstream ethno-nationalism, and politicize the very notion of truth.
Can you give us a minute, please? Thank you. Hey, so you fucked me.
It may not have been the family's mission to destabilize democracies around the world, but that has been its most consequential legacy. One of the most ironic aspects of media coverage in recent years has been how much media tends to pay attention to the media. During Trump's 4 years in the White House, Fox News was covered almost as closely as the White House and often in the same stories. But to see Fox News as an arm of the Trump White House risks missing the larger picture. It may be more accurate to say that the White House is like the Prime Minister's office in Britain and in Australia was just one tool among many that this family used to exert influence over the world events. But first, let's start with one of my favorite shows, the TV series Succession.
I changed my mind, Kendall.
When? When exactly? Because it feels like you fucked me.
It's me. It's mainly me.
Before the series premiered, Jesse Armstrong, its creator, executive producer, and showrunner, said that the characters are a fictional family. quote, "There's loads of succession stories to draw on. We wanted to draw on all the good, rich stories there are about succession and about media and high politics," end quote. However, a few years earlier, Armstrong wrote a screenplay about the inner workings of the Murdoch family that was never produced. So the comparison between the Roy family of the show and the Murdochs is inevitable. Still, there are definitely a few other prominent families who could have inspired the series. On May 27, 2023, in an article in The Guardian, Armstrong revealed that his initial idea was a feature film about the Murdoch family, but the script never went into production. Armstrong wrote a new script centered on original characters, loosely inspired by various powerful media families such as the Murdochs, the Redstones, the Maxwells, and the Sulzbergers. But if we were to compare the Roys to the Murdochs, we can say that both families have an aging patriarch who has stayed at his company well past standard retirement age. Murdoch, at the age of 92, stepped back into the role of chairman of Fox News after the late Roger Ailes' ouster, and now serves as the chairman of Fox Corporation. James Murdoch, at the age of 50, was the CEO of 21st Century Fox from 2015 to 2019, and his 51-year-old brother Lachlan is the executive chairman of Nova Entertainment, co-chairman of News Corp, and executive chairman and CEO of Fox Corporation. Their older sisters, Elizabeth and Prudence, are also media executives in the United Kingdom and Australia, respectively. Spoiler alert, the clearest visual parallel between Rupert Murdoch and Logan Roy occurred in the final season, when Logan's speech on paper boxes directly referenced a similar moment when Rupert gave a speech to the Wall Street Journal newsroom on boxes in 2007, and in a previous season when Logan and his son Kendall testified before the Congress as Murdoch and his son James did, however, in front of the British Parliament. If you wonder if Rupert Murdoch or his family members ever watched the show, and if they liked it, the answer is they might have watched it, and some of them might have even liked it. Executive producer Frank Rich told Town and Country in 2019 that he heard from Murdoch insiders that members of the family found the show to be interesting and even amusing. However, Rupert Murdoch himself responded to an email sent by a Semaphore reporter that he had never seen the show. But while the 19-year-old Murdoch might not have watched the show, we know that other Murdochs might have. Vanity Fair reported that as part of the settlement for her divorce from Murdoch, his fourth wife, Jerry Hole, was barred from contacting Succession producers with ideas for storylines. These must have been bothersome for some Murdochs.
It's mainly me. But you, 3 years
For me, I believe that Succession was, in some aspects, one of the best TV shows in the last few years. One reason is the fantastic soundtrack and background music. The other aspects I am compiling into a separate video. I hope you enjoy watching. But for now, let's take a deep dive into the world of the Murdoch family.
and you just let him come.
It's not a website. And I was being professional.
I hear it played weak, conflict averse.
The story of the Murdoch family was centered on empire building in the original sense of the term, territorial conquest. Murdoch's news empire is a monument to decades' worth of transactional relationships with elected officials. He began with a small regional paper in Australia, inherited from his father, and quickly expanded the business into a national and then an international force, in part by ruthlessly using his platform to help elect his preferred candidates and then ruthlessly using those candidates to help extend his reach. And even though he said that he never asked the Prime Minister for anything, but press moguls don't have to ask when their media outlets can broadcast their desires. Politicians knew what Murdoch wanted, and they know what he can deliver for them, the votes that can translate into power. This model was developed actually by his father, Keith Murdoch, who, when his son Rupert was born in 1931, was in the midst of his first campaign to elect a prime minister from his newsroom in Australia. Keith gained fame by evading military censors to report on the slaughter of his countrymen during the British-led Gallipoli campaign of World War I, a campaign that is featured in many films, by the way. He leveraged that fame to become a powerful executive at the Melbourne Herald and Weekly Times News Company, a position that he in turn leveraged to punish his enemies and reward his allies. The candidate he was supporting for Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, earlier helped Keith overcome regulatory restrictions to start a radio station for his company. Lyons won, and as Keith saw it, Australia's new leader served at his pleasure. When the two later squabbled, he reportedly said, "I put him there, and I'll put him out." Keith's efforts to create Australia's first national news chain drew the attention of a regional newspaper that warned about the danger of his ambitions to create a press dictatorship for all Australia with Murdoch-inspired leaders and Murdoch-trained reporters. His business interests were bound with ideological inclinations about how power should work and who should be allowed to exercise it. A member of the Eugenics Society of Victoria, Keith once wrote in an editorial that the great question facing Britain was, will she, if needs be, fight for a white Australia? And unlike his son, Keith eventually failed in building his media empire. One of the two regional newspapers he owned had to be sold to pay off his death duties when he died suddenly in 1952. The other, News of Adelaide, was left for his 21-year-old son Rupert, who was finishing his degree at Oxford and was left with something from his father that proved to be much more valuable in future: an education in how to use media holdings to extract favors from politicians. And without wasting any time, he started buying local newspapers and founded the country's first national general interest newspaper, The Australian, through which he would help elect governments that eased national regulations designed to limit the size of media companies. In other words, remove all the obstacles that might hinder the creation of his media empire. And eventually, he would take control of nearly 2/3 of the Australian media market, which was not nearly enough. This is why Rupert moved to Fleet Street in London, the home of many of the UK's major newspapers.
50 years ago, he volunteered for a war just to impress the town slut. And now, no one ever hears the end of it.
Carnival Barker for all the wars we really didn't need.
In 1969, Murdoch bought the News of the World weekly national tabloid newspaper that ceased publication in 2011, and The Sun tabloid newspaper that has today the largest newspaper circulation in the United Kingdom. Using both, Murdoch successfully promoted Margaret Thatcher's candidacy for Prime Minister, and once elected, her government declined to refer his acquisition of the Times of London to anti-monopoly regulators, giving him the country's leading establishment broadsheet to go with his mass circulation tabloids. By the early 1980s, while Murdoch owned large portions of the Australian and British print media, he was attempting to expand into TV, and despite his strong political relationships, he failed in obtaining a satellite broadcasting license from the British government. But that didn't stop him. He went to start a news TV channel that will broadcast to Britain from Luxembourg. This channel was Sky Television that grew later into the British media and telecommunications conglomerate Sky Group. His relationship with the Thatcher government pushed him to look the other way to Sky's existence in the British news sphere, and soon Murdoch would help elect the predecessor of Thatcher in 1992 as a Prime Minister of Britain, John Major.
It was suggested to me that I ought to try and make some effort to get closer to the Murdoch press, and I agreed that I would invite Mr. Murdoch to dinner.
And the Sun headlined bluntly in its front page, "Is the Sun wanna?" after relentlessly smearing the character of his opponent Neil Kinnock. It published a savage 9-page piece titled "Nightmare on Kinnock Street" that included a satirical endorsement from the ghost of Joseph Stalin. And when conservatives would try to push back against his ever-growing influence, Murdoch would not hesitate in switching sides. In the 1990s, he supported Britain's New Labour movement after conservatives forced him to scale back his newspaper operations in order to expand further into TV. Murdoch also supported the Labour politician Tony Blair. According to the final volumes of the Alastair Campbell's Government Diaries, Murdoch joined an overcrewed attempt by U.S. Republicans to force Tony Blair to accelerate British involvement in the Iraq War a week before a crucial House of Commons vote in 2003.
Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now that's for their...
In 1980, Murdoch was introduced to the inner circle of the then Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, by Roy Cohn, an advisor of the Senator Joseph McCarthy, and later a Donald Trump mentor. That circle included Roger Stone Jr., the current senator, who was the head of Reagan's New York operations, who said in a later interview that he helped Murdoch weaponize his latest tabloid purchase, the New York Post, on Reagan's behalf in the 1980 elections. Even Reagan's team credited Murdoch with delivering him the state that year. Murdoch gave Stone an election day printing plate from the New York Post in a celebration, and his administration subsequently facilitated Murdoch's entry into the American television market, quickly approving his application of American citizenship so he could buy TV stations too. The Reagan administration even waived a prohibition against owning a TV station and a newspaper in the same market, allowing Murdoch to hold on to his big metro dailies, the New York Post and the Boston Herald, even as he moved into TV in both cities. George H.W. Bush's administration was no different. It suspended rules that forbade broadcast networks from owning primetime shows or profiting from them. They allowed Murdoch to build the nation's fourth broadcast network by rapidly filling out his schedule with shows from his newly acquired 20th Century Fox studio, like The Simpsons and 21 Jump Street. The elimination of the Fairness Doctrine by the Reagan administration, which had for decades required broadcasters to present both sides of any major public policy debate, spawned a new generation of right-wing radio personalities which were free to provide a different sort of opinion programming to a large, latent conservative audience that was mistrustful of the media in general. It was only a matter of time until similar programming started migrating to the 24-hour-a-day cable television, of which Murdoch was a pioneer. He watched his younger rival Ted Turner build his own cable news network, CNN, and grow it successfully. CNN was the first 24-hour news TV channel and the first all-new TV channel in the United States. In 1991, the Persian Gulf War was waged by a United Nations authorized coalition force led by the US against Iraq in response to Iraq's invasion and annexation of Kuwait. This war marked the introduction of live news broadcasts from the front lines of the battle. CNN was the only 24-hour coverage news network, and by the time the war began, they had already been doing this type of coverage for 10 years. The success of CNN led many governments, companies, and businessmen to build their own versions of 24-hour news channels. Al Jazeera was founded 5 years later in 1996, and the same year, Rupert Murdoch started Fox News with the former media advisor for Presidents Nixon and George Bush, Roger Ailes. Some of you might know of his resignation from Fox News in 2016 after being accused of sexual harassment. By now, I think you might have started noticing the pattern of the kind of personalities Murdoch would work with in the US, which makes my job easier in introducing the next character that you might be familiar with, and who other than Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City and lawyer of President Donald Trump. Giuliani came for the help of Murdoch when Time Warner, which owned CNN, refused to carry Fox News on its cable system in New York. Giuliani pressured them to move toward an eventual deal. A round-the-clock network with a virtual monopoly on conservative TV news, Fox conferred on Murdoch a whole new sort of influence that was enhanced by politically polarizing events like the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the post-September 11 war in Iraq that marked its early years. If Murdoch's papers were a blunt instrument, Fox's influence was in some ways more subtle, but also far more profound. Hour after hour, day after day, it was shaping the realities of millions of Americans who treated it as their primary news source. A 2007 study found that the introduction of the network on a particular cable system pushed local voters to the right, the Fox News effect, as it became known. In a 2014 poll, a majority of self-described conservatives said it was the only news network they trusted. Murdoch's office above the Fox newsroom in Midtown Manhattan became a requisite stop on any serious Republican presidential candidate's schedule.
Not as an excuse, maybe as an explanation.
50 years and an untold number of deals. After taking possession of the news of Adelaide, Murdoch had arrived at the pinnacle of global influence. A former speechwriter for George W. Bush said in an interview with Nightline, "Republicans originally thought that Fox worked for us, and now we're discovering we work for Fox."
It's my distinct honor to introduce the Commander-in-Chief and the President of the United States, my friend Donald J. Trump.
During Donald Trump's rise to celebrity in New York in the late 70s and 80s, he had aggressively cultivated the New York Post that is owned by Murdoch. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, became close to Murdoch too after he entered the media business by purchasing the New York Observer in 2006. Murdoch and his wife would even take Kushner and Ivanka Trump on a vacation on a yacht in the Caribbean. And after Murdoch's divorce in 2013, Kushner helped him find a decorator for his new bachelor apartment, and Ivanka was one of 5 individuals designated to oversee the trust of Murdoch and his wife's 2 daughters, valued at $300 million, a role she relinquished at 2016. 1 year before the presidential elections of 2016, Murdoch would sit at a dinner table with Donald Trump in the corporate dining room of the Fox News building in Midtown Manhattan. The dinner was proposed to Rupert in a call with Ivanka. Her husband Kushner was there too, and just as the first course was being served, Trump would tell Murdoch that he was going to run for president. According to 3 sources who spoke to the New York Times, Murdoch didn't even look up from his soup and replied, "You have to be prepared to be wrapped up badly." The hard truth was that Trump's appeal as a ratings driver did not lead Murdoch to see him as a serious person who would become president. He would describe him as an idiot, as reported by 3 people close to him, a description he denied that he ever used to describe Trump. Even Roger Ailes, the longtime head of Fox News, who was close to Trump too, was no more generous. They both worked on Rudy Giuliani's mayoral campaign in 1989, Ailes as a media advisor and Trump as a fundraising figurehead. Ailes gave Trump his infamous regular appearance on Fox and Friends in 2011, which he used to advance his birther campaign, in which he asked former President Obama to show his birth certificate to the public. Despite all that, Ailes' response to Trump's intention to run for president was that he wasn't remotely worthy of the Oval Office. This was all a series of unpleasant surprises to Trump, who assumed that his relationships would be enough to secure the positive coverage. Trump would complain that Fox favored Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio over him, and he would be enraged by Fox's host Bret Baier, with whom he used to play golf. Baier would place him at the bottom of his list of candidates with potential at the time when he was actually leading in the polls. It would be almost unbelievable for someone to believe that this actually happened. And for months, Stephen Hayes, a Fox contributor, would call Trump a clown, to which Trump would respond by sending him his resume with a note asking to tell Hayes no clown could have done all this. In an interview with Sean Hannity, Trump would ask Fox to fire some contributors because they were biased against him. However, it turned out that Trump could actually actually out-Trump Fox in their game and that they are the ones who would need him eventually. At the time, new right-wing outlets such as Breitbart, Gateway Pundit, One American News, and Sinclair were embracing his candidacy and growing in viewership. Trump would go on and warn Ailes, "I can go on the Today Show in my pajamas and 5 million people will watch." He would ask Ailes to force Fox's anchor Megyn Kelly to apologize to him after she asked him in the first Republican primary debate to defend his own comments about women. Quote, "You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals," end quote. She wouldn't apologize and Trump would boycott the next debate that she would moderate, and guess what? Viewer numbers would tumble in half. Kushner was privately lobbying Murdoch to reconsider his attitude toward his father-in-law, showing him videos of Trump's overflowing campaign rallies in his iPhone, but Murdoch would still look for alternatives. Or in the summer of 2015, he wrote a personal check for $200,000 to the super PAC of Governor John Kasich, a relatively moderate Republican from Ohio. He even considered supporting Hillary Clinton herself, who he once hosted a Senate fundraiser for, and he actually made the call, a personal call, to Clinton, leaving her a message she would call him back immediately to decline his invitation. But there were still things that would keep him hesitant of supporting Trump. His ideology, his newly honed political identity, railing against military intervention, free trade, and immigration. They were all positions that directly contradicted Murdoch's neoconservative views. Murdoch had enthusiastically supported the Iraq War, evangelized for open immigration policies, and endorsed international trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. His attitude toward Trump's emergent ideology was often captured on an anti-Trump editorial page of the Wall Street Journal by an editor who was in frequent contact with his paper's owner. However, ironically, Murdoch was in a sense responsible for unleashing the forces that were now propelling Trump's rise. During the Obama years, Fox News had found ratings and profits with its wall-to-wall coverage of Tea Party rallies and opinion shows that advanced the campaign to delegitimize the country's first African-American president. And as the Republican nominating process progressed, this populist anti-establishment energy was unmistakably coalescing around Trump.
If I'm elected president, we will win and we will win and we will win.
By March 2016, Donald Trump, the man Murdoch had so quickly dismissed a year earlier, was now the clear front-runner, and Murdoch was taking his first tentative steps toward embracing him.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's the answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple to, you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
It would be reported later that Murdoch would call the White House at least once a week, and these calls would open bluntly with "Murdoch here." In this video, we saw how Rupert Murdoch has built the biggest media operation on the planet and how his empire, which includes cable channel Fox News, The Times of London, and The Wall Street Journal, has given him extraordinary power and influenced democratic governments on 3 continents. There's a ton more info I'd encourage you to follow on how Murdoch and other media moguls have shaped our world. And finally, I would like to sincerely thank you if you made it to the end of this video. You're the best and I really appreciate it. Peace.